I'm quite excited for Rivian's R2 platform, which we've still got a few years away before deliveries officially begin, but I'm hoping for an unveiling at least some point in 2024. Rivian unveiled the R1T and R1S several years before first deliveries began, and while a lot of people probably don't want to talk about it, especially Rivian right now, because they've already got enough on their plate, most startups have one or two vehicles maybe. Rivian's got the delivery van, which they're expanding to now outside of Amazon. They've got the SUV and the pickup truck all trying to ramp simultaneously. It is not easy to do, but Rivian has a much more clear path towards profitability with a higher volume vehicle like the R2, which they say is going to be intended for global shipping, not just the United States market. And the reason I get excited for that is I think the US market is very weird. We're very bizarre, especially when I've traveled overseas. You notice how rare it is to see vehicles on the road like the F-150, which has been the best-selling truck, in fact, best-selling vehicle in the United States for decades. And I get that's why there's so much hype and excitement around the Cybertruck, is because it's the most valuable automotive brand going up against the most popular vehicle segment in the US. But outside of the US, people do not typically buy trucks and vehicles of that size. And yeah, even the Rivian R1T is in a lower class, a smaller class than the F-150, but still, relative to other countries, it's quite large, and also the bigger issue, much more expensive. And the R2 is intended to be kind of what the Model 3 was for Tesla, a more lower priced option, probably around the $40,000 range. And Rivian, I think, has done an amazing job establishing a brand with their first generation R1 products, and now has to figure out, how do we keep that character, how do we keep that spirit of Rivian going with a much cheaper vehicle that is inevitably going to have much less features than the R1 platform does, because they might actually have to make money on this one, right? But what I think Rivian has done wisely from the beginning is intentionally try to go after markets that Tesla is not very present in, because obviously there's only so many people in the automotive market that are actually willing to make the switch to electric. And obviously, if you're thinking about buying an electric car, you kind of have to consider Tesla. And these days, while CCS still unfortunately exists on new cars, you kind of have to go with Tesla for the NACS port and the supercharging network. Choosing to not go with a Tesla in the US is going to be this big hassle, but in the future that shouldn't be as big an issue now that pretty much all major automakers have announced NACS support. It's inevitable now, everybody's going to be switching to it by 2025. But now that Tesla is kind of expanding into the pickup truck space and Cybertruck deliveries are just a couple weeks away, I'm curious to see how Rivian is going to find a vehicle that is still able to separate itself from the rest of the automotive market while still being affordable. And of course, the next real trick is going to be not cannibalizing your current day sales. Most people are pretty sure that the first R2 vehicle is going to be more of an SUV, likely not as big as the R1S, but Rivian definitely has a ton of pent-up demand for the R1S. They've said that's like 2/3 of their reservations. Lots of people love their full-size 7-seater SUVs, but people like my friend Mike, who let me check out his Rivian R1S in person, has admitted to me that he did not need the 7-seater. For tax reasons, he went with the SUV, but mainly was just looking for a great off-roading, all-electric vehicle. The suspension, the software, the acceleration, there were so many reasons to go with a Rivian, but if a cheaper R2 entered the platform, I think that may affect a lot of people's decision about it. If there was a 5-seater that perhaps wasn't as long, but as Rivian has boasted a lot with their vehicles, they have an emphasis on adventuring, on outdoors, and trying to be great, not just on-road experiences, but also off-road experiences. And of course, a shorter wheelbase along with a dual motor powertrain could still probably perform great off-road and have a decent suspension system in place. So my thinking is that with the R2 platform, they can skim down on the size a little bit. Don't need to have more than 2 motors, although I have a hard time visualizing Rivian making a rear-wheel drive vehicle, so I think dual motor is probably going to be their safe spot. And then also minimalizing a lot of the design. The R1 interior is fantastic. I got to hang out with Mike for a few hours inside that SUV, and it's just wonderful, but they've got to take some things out if they want to increase the desirability and optimize their next generation Georgia plant, which is still in its early development phase. But this could involve getting rid of the driver's display. Tesla has already taught us that it is possible to do a mass market vehicle that a lot of people want to buy that just has one singular display in the middle with your speedometer and all your settings. And while I do love the Rivian interior, I have to admit that that screen gets cut off a little bit by the steering wheel, and a lot of the screen real estate on that middle display is not properly utilized on the Rivian. Like when you're navigating, sure, you got your maps and stuff on there, which is nice, but until the more recent update update where they added all of that battery and powertrain and elevation data, a lot of the time that screen was just showing what drive mode you were in. And it's a big, fairly high resolution display, you know, for a car. So I feel like for the sake of cost reduction and also better software optimization, you could probably just do one display in the middle. You could also take out a few extra bells and whistles like the ambient lighting, which there's not even that much customization on. Just once a year when Rivians get their Halloween update, you get some of that red interior lighting, but is that the kind of thing you need on a mass market vehicle? Probably not. You know, Tesla has enough economies of scale that they're starting to implement ambient lighting into the Model 3, but this is not the stage Rivian is at yet, because Tesla's super profitable. They can afford to spend a little extra money on bells and whistles on interior features, but the Rivian probably not, and I also think the R2 could benefit from slimming down on all of the options. Rivians are gorgeous vehicles that come in all kinds of great colors. Some of my friends like forest green, some of them even like compass yellow, although that's a different mic, and my favorite is personally Red Canyon, which I've seen in the wild. It is a beautiful vehicle, and I really wish I could justify it. It's just gorgeous, but all of these extra paint color options do add to the overall complexity of the factory. So I would even go as far as to say maybe just have 2 or 3 color choices, you know, just have a black, a white, and maybe a darker green, because Rivian customers seem to love that darker green, kind of blends in with the foresty aesthetic that Rivian goes with. And maybe the frunk size has to be condensed down a little bit to improve visibility and also just reduce the number of parts and complexities. Maybe you don't necessarily need a powered frunk on a $40,000 vehicle. And hopefully, thanks to Rivian's in-house design with the enduro motors and some improvements with heat pump technology, you could actually get a fairly small battery pack in there. You know, instead of having 100 kilowatt hours, maybe we could get by with 80 kilowatt hours. But unfortunately, based on the unrevealed R2 clay model behind RJ, it feels like Rivian, like the one shortcoming of this brand, which I kind of get, you have to make a compromise with all car engineering decisions, is that Rivians are just genuinely not that aerodynamic. I mean, for the class of vehicle, they are still incredibly efficient, and they're probably more aerodynamic than something like a F-150 or a Chevy Suburban, but yeah, they're definitely more in favor of that boxy look, which does maximize your utility and your cargo space, but isn't optimized great for aerodynamics, which means that if they do want to reduce pricing with this next gen model, which usually involves making a smaller battery pack, that will likely come as a hit to the range. And I think with a great charging infrastructure, you honestly don't need that much range, so maybe that's a good thing that they're doing this later, because R2 platform isn't really supposed to be ready until around 2026, and by then all Rivians should be switched to NACS, and there's going to be so many superchargers and non-superchargers that still support NACS all over the country. So maybe 2026 is when you could get away with charging, you know, $40,000-$50,000 for a vehicle that only gets 250 miles of range, but it has a much bigger emphasis on off-roading and adventuring, which those kinds of off-road vehicles probably aren't going to have the most energy efficient tires or shapes anyway. And I think that's the kind of spirit and character that Rivian has captured. Tesla, definitely the way I look at them, is like the McDonald's of EVs, both in good and bad ways. They sell more than anybody else, and of course they know how to manufacture everything at scale and do it profitably, so they're able to make super slippery aerodynamic designs with reasonably small battery packs so that they can secure those good margins. But Rivian with the R2 has got to find a way to separate themselves. I don't think Rivian should just make their own version of a Model Y, like same shape and everything, just with a Rivian logo. That would be boring, and the demand probably wouldn't even be there for it. They need to focus on capturing that off-roading and adventuring spirit so it can differentiate itself from a Model Y with those iconic headlights and those more utility-focused roof rack designs and tailgates, and find a way to do it profitably, which is not going to be easy. But I'm just as excited, if not more, for the R2T specifically, because I like pickup trucks, honestly. I just don't like how big most of them are. In the US especially, everybody is obsessed with their giant pickup trucks, and I grew up with a Ford Ranger, and really the only thing wrong with it was a Ford, which meant that there were engine problems all the time, and that's why I don't have it anymore. And of course it ran on gasoline, which I was not a fan of, and that was not going to last for me. But I love seeing around town a lot of people buying these Ford Mavericks. You know, they're pickup trucks that can still fit, you know, a reasonable amount of people, and they drive more like a sedan. You know, you park it in a busy parking lot more like you would a sedan, but you still have a big bed, you still got some utility, and with an electric version, you'd still probably have a decent amount of frunk space. So seeing Rivian make a more world-optimized truck that's even smaller than the R1T, with a bit more minimalism on the interior and maybe a bigger emphasis on aerodynamics with better efficiency, you know, a smaller battery pack, that's the kind of truck I could see myself buying in the future. I don't want some big old thing. I want like affordable, reasonable, and that's my biggest issue. I had to drive an F-350 around a lot for my job back in the day, and I hated driving big vehicles. I always have. That's what I love about my Model 3, and I'm not against pickup trucks inherently. I just think most of them kind of blow up the dimensions a little bit too much. So what do you guys want to see in the Rivian R2 platform? I love talking about this stuff, so I'm gonna have to wrap it up here, otherwise I could talk all day. Feel free to let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, and thank you to everybody supporting this channel directly. Seriously, helps us out a ton, as does just watching these videos, and thanks again. Have an excellent rest of your day.